Meeting is called to order. Welcome to meeting number 24 of the Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, December 11, 2024.
I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of our witnesses. First, please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, please click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. Clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can. We appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. Collègues, j'aimerais maintenant souhaiter la bienvenue à nos...
Dear colleagues, I'd now like to welcome our colleagues with us today from the Montreal Port Authority, Mr. Julien Baudry, Chief of Staff and Vice President, Communications and External Affairs. Welcome. And from the Saguenay Port Authority, Carl Laberge, President and Chief Executive Officer by video conference. You're welcome. Mr. Baudry, you have the floor for your opening remarks, 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify. Canada finds itself at the crossroads in a context of geopolitical reorganization of procurement chains. Ports have now become a platform for resilience and for economic sovereignty. Like all ports in Canada, our port doesn't work alone. Our role is to provide local businesses with reliable, competitive, and predictable options for accessing global trade through maritime transport. And that's what we do every day with more than 400 million worth of goods and nearly 600,000 jobs, which are supported from Germany to Morocco, India, and China. We are at the heart of existing and developing free trade agreements. However, we do not operate on a level playing field with our American competitors. Internationally, the picture is clear. The ports that are establishing themselves as leaders are now fully integrated, managing logistics hubs, developing large intermodal platforms, and offering licensed services. For example, the Port of New York, New Jersey alone handles more containers than all Canadian port authorities combined. Its revenues are diversified, tolls, commercial real estate assets, and so on. It has an investment capacity supported by simpler, more predictable, and faster regulatory processes. In short, international champions no longer limit themselves to the strict operation of docks, but build true ecosystems that generate and capture more value while offering businesses a more seamless experience. A recent Globe and Mail article pointed out that a large portion of our fruits and vegetables and other foodstuffs from abroad first go through U.S. ports, a strategic vulnerability that exposes us directly to Washington's decisions, which alone can slow, surcharge, or interrupt these essential flows. The same logic applies to many manufacturing inputs that cost more because U.S. wholesalers have to pay international tariffs. On the East Coast of America, we estimate that between 500,000 and 600,000 containers destined for Canada currently go through U.S. ports rather than through Canadian infrastructure. Uncertainty related to labor disputes, combined with the strong performance of U.S. ports, is a major contributor to this trade leakage, whether it's to repatriate this cargo or to meet Canada's ambition to double exports outside the United States. Canadian businesses need capacity. Let me be clear. The Port of Montreal is ready. Last year, our growth was above average on the American East Coast. On the East Coast, rather, the battle is rough, tough, and maintaining century-old infrastructure while adopting new technologies and adapting to climate change is a daily challenge. In 2025, the Port of Montreal reached a utilization rate of 72.4%. If the trend continues, we will be at 86% in 2030. Above 85% cost rise, the carbon footprint increases, the business opportunities are lost. No vacancy is not an option. The country core expansion is therefore timely. After more than a decade of preparation, 5 years of consultations, and 388 integrated conditions, preparatory work is underway. As the first carbon-neutral container handling terminal in North America, Contrecoeur will offer a clear competitive advantage. Its strategic location reduces its carbon footprint. Trucking and rail distances will be significantly shorter than alternative options, particularly in the U.S. The Port of Montreal model has a bright future, both because it complements existing Canadian ports and because it's located close to those who need import capacity. Among the 600 containers that were constructed and ordered in 2025, the segment with the greatest strength or growth is from the Montreal port, an increase of about 500%. Of course, we need to talk about mega ships. They run between Asia, the Pacific, and also use ports like Halifax and St. John, with whom we collaborate. There's a future for that, but for the situation to be improved, I will make 3 recommendations. First, the Montreal port, like all Canadian ports, needs to act as true economic development agents. We need to be more agile, and we need to be targeted in our letters patent so that we can generate more revenue and to adjust more rapidly to the fluctuating situations on the market. We also need a coherent national supply chain strategy for ports, particularly one that is supported by the repatriation of commodities meant for Canadian businesses. The ports and corridors must be treated as a system. The reality is that trade and food security doesn't depend on one port or another, but depends on the intermodality between rail, trucks, and storage systems. So they need physical infrastructure as well as digital infrastructures. Digital corridor projects will enable us to take the best decisions so that we can be more predictable and be more competitive when it comes to the businesses that use our services. I will stop there, and I look forward to answering questions from the committee. Thank you very much, Mr. Baudry. Now we have Mr. Labeche. You have the floor for your opening remarks. 5 minutes, sir. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Let me give you some information about the Port of Saguenay. We are located on the Saguenay River, so we are part of the larger ports of St. Lawrence, Saguenay. And St. Lawrence is the longest navigation route in North America. The Saguenay port, it has a specificity because it was displaced in the early 80s. We were located downtown in the former town of Chicoutimi, and the port was moved away from there. So right now, we are located away from downtown, far away from residential areas. At the time of the move, the idea was to take advantage of the Saguenay deep waters so that we could take in large ships and also make sure that the port became a lever of economic development. This is a port that can receive the biggest ships in Quebec. Another specificity is the size. We have more than 1,200 hectares of land located directly at the port, at the industrial zone. It's about 12 square kilometers of land. Right now, we are planning one of the industrial zones in Canada, and we are working together with the government of Quebec and the city of Saguenay, which have both announced significant investments in infrastructures in the port zone, in the industrial zone. Right now, we are building a system that is going to cost about $110 million that will become operational in June. We are setting up infrastructure to be able to handle a good quantity of bulk. We have received support from the provincial and federal governments in this project. So We are different because we are located towards the north of Quebec by the St. Lawrence River. So this gives us access to the existing rail systems. And this is a sector that is well known in the mining sector when it comes to critical minerals. So we are connected to that network. The Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region, where we are located, it's one that is well known as being one of the main producers of aluminum in North America. There's a lot of metals, lots of industries. We also have the military base of Bagotville, which is one of the biggest military bases in the country. So in the region, we see a port that is developing assets to be able to engage in industrial development. We have the capacity to take in ships. There's great collaboration with the northern part of Quebec where there are mining projects going on. So we have possibilities to collaborate with other countries in the world. That's what we're looking out for right now. So we are setting up this infrastructure right now. We have received support from the government of Quebec. The Saguenay municipality is also working with the federal government and the infrastructure bank to come up with funding mechanisms that will help us complete those infrastructure projects. So it's very strategic. We think that we are well positioned to do what we're trying to do in Quebec, to have a west-east corridor that will help us export commodities and also be involved in mining. We also want to be able to find an added value by setting up industries around the port. So that's what we're doing right now. We are looking to building this infrastructure this year. So we are making progress. So that's our current position. What we're trying to continue doing is to receive support from the federal government to be able to fund some additional resources we need, other additional infrastructure we need. There was an announcement made last week. There was another announcement last fall for port infrastructure. So we are hopeful that we'll receive support for our industrial infrastructure. And we hope that the Canada Infrastructure Bank and others will also support us. We are a small Canadian ports authority that is growing significantly, and it's helping Canada to meet its objectives simply through allocation. So we need the resources to grow. Thank you very much, Mr. Laberge. Thank you for your statements. Right now, we will start with questions and answers. We'll start with Mr. Lawrence. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Witnesses, I'll just start off with a brief bit of housekeeping, and I believe all parties on board, so hopefully this should go quickly. I would like to move my motion that the committee invite Peter Neil Verlason to appear as a witness for the committee's tentative meeting on the changing landscape of truck drivers in Canada on March 23rd, 2026. Of course, Peter's sister was a victim of a tragic accident involving a transport truck, and he would very much like to testify, and I appreciate all members what I suspect support there. So,
thank you very much, Mr. Lawrence. I believe that members understand the motion, and there have been discussions prior to today's meeting. Do I have unanimous consent of all members?
yes.
Seeing no objection, unanimous consent is given. Mr. Lawrence, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, and I appreciate all members' support. It means a lot to Peter and his family. And Mr. Baudry, most of my questions will be directed towards you. you're now in the position to start expanding and starting the Contra Core expansion. But I want to talk a little bit about where we are before we'll get there. So currently, the World Bank's Global Port Index ranks Montreal 351st out of 405. What would you attribute the poor performance of the Port of Montreal to?
Merci pour votre question. Il est certain que l'ensemble des ports canadiens, mais en
Thank you
particulier...
for your question. All Canadian ports, but the destination ports are not valued in the same way as the others. The index in question doesn't take into account that the ships are 100% unloaded in Montreal and 100% loaded, for example. So in the methodology that's used, we don't take into account that aspect because we're a very productive port. However, we can certainly do better, and we could probably, that in order to do as well as the best ports in the world, we need better intermodal connections with working with all levels of government. Currently, the challenges for Montreal are also in investment that's required for equipment that are on a Quebec scale or a municipal scale. Doing that work would help us improve the performance greatly. I'm saying that why other ports in the world do better is because we don't start on the same level. They have a higher and more diversified income, and also they have a better capacity for digitalization, and they have networks that we don't have in Canada.
The discussions for the expansion that's going to be started in the 1980s, over 40 or 50 years. So someone at the Port of Montreal at that point had the vision. But how would you say that over the last 10 years, the federal government specifically, because we're in the House of Commons for the federal government, has been as a partner to work over the last 10 years? Have they given you the support you needed to get the work you needed done?
C'est un processus très long de consultation.
It's a very lengthy process of consultations that we have with preliminary consultations that were managed by the agency. The Canadian government helped us in the past with subsidies, but in reality, we have a phase that's very different with the collaboration we have now with the Major Projects Office. So it doesn't mean that we go faster than others. There's no acceleration measure for Contrecoeur, but to have a central agency that is able to coordinate efforts means that today we're in a very good position to deliver our projects on time and without going over budget. And I want to go back. I insist that some laws, some regulatory amendments can and must be made more quickly. The ports and the Canadian sector wants to have predictability. The quicker we can function, the better it is. And I also want to say, be it in Contrecoeur or in Montreal, the best way of helping Canadian ports is to go and find the capacity that exists in the ports, and the capacity in the Port of Montreal was affected by instability in labor relations, a labor environment which means that there's better stability, and so that the employer and the unions have to help us convince Canadians.
Over the last decade, and the Canadian economy has really held the economy back. With that being said, what would be the date that the Contrecoeur expansion would be completed?
Aujourd'hui, nous sommes dans un échéancier qui nous...
At this point, we have a schedule that gives us to come into operation starting in 2030. As I said, if that trend continues, we'll be at 86% utilization rate. If we were to delay that coming into operation, we have to understand that some Canadian ambitions might be difficult to realize. Currently, 6% of the exports to the U.S. have to go in another direction. The Port of Montreal won't be able to respond to the Quebec and Ontario demand, so we have to delay beyond 2030. There'll be loss of opportunities for Canadian businesses.
Reeves, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, colleagues. Thank you to the witnesses for joining us today. Bonjour. As we've heard before in conversations in this committee, and as we've heard extensively from the Prime Minister and from the government, it's clear that I think we're all on the same page. Canada must diversify its trading partners, and we have to increase our exports around the world with a focus on expanding beyond the North American continent. The government's $5 billion Trade Diversification Corridor Fund is part of the strategy to double non-U.S. exports over the next 10 years, and will support projects across the country, including national and regional trade bottlenecks affecting some of Canada's ports. For the witnesses this morning, could you please share how funds from the National Trade Corridors Fund in 2024 and now the new Trade Diversification Corridors Fund will help your ports to expand to meet these targets for non-U.S. exports within the next decade? Perhaps we could begin with the Port of Montreal and then the Port of Saguenay.
Merci pour votre question.
Thank you for your question. I want to say clearly that any public funds devoted to a project for the Montreal port, be it from the Quebec government or the federal government, is a lever, basically. We're talking, in the case of Contrecoeur, public investment allows us to reduce risks, but also to bring the Port Authority to make investments that will be paid by the private sector. Every investment made through the national trade commercial corridors is not only for the good for the port, it's also for users. The investments made in the past have made India the third major partner for the Port of Montreal. Why? Because we're able to obtain infrastructure that allows us, with terminus like Scanex and the increase in the rail capacity, to better serve the west of the country. So it's not the port that's the most competitive, it's also the product that's in the container of the boat abroad. And it's the same thing in all countries. The final user is the one who gets the advantage of these profits from these investments.
Comme Julien l'a bien dit,
as Julien said, these investments, we make them for the users to allow us to have infrastructures that are more efficient, more competitive. I talked about our handling of large volumes. We had support from the National Trade Corridor, commercial corridors. So that was essential for us to achieve that project. And we have to enlarge our port capacity to respond to that demand, and also the demand that will arrive after the critical minerals projects and the industrials projects that will be developed in the industrial zone of the port. So the announcement that we have for the new fund for the diversification of trade corridors is essential for this development. And it's certain that for an organization like ours, with limited financial resources but important responsibilities in terms of serving our sector, we have to get the support of our partners, such as the provincial government and the federal government as well. And in our case, even the municipality of Saguenay is involved, because we're managing public infrastructures for the well-being of the public. And there is a level of risk that can be quite high upstream, but it's important to get these infrastructures that we need, because it takes a long time to develop them as well. Thank you. So for both witnesses, there's a question. What is the current capacity of your port, and what's the maximum capacity for your port if you had all necessary resources? I'll start with Montreal and Saguenay afterwards. Currently, the Port of Montreal has 2.1 million container handling capacity, because in our capacity at 85%, we're closer to 1.73 million containers. And the closer we get to the maximum, the less competitive we are. Simply said, you have containers that are empty. Sometimes there are seasons where you have to refuse clients and send them elsewhere because the volumes are spread out over a whole year with some seasons that are more demanding than others. In 2019, we had more difficult seasons for any exporter or importer. So with this kind of investment for projects of digitalization, of optimization, we can reduce costs, we reduce our carbon footprint, and in the end, we increase the competitivity of the ports. And also, there's a multiplier effect on the products that we send. From Montreal, it's Europe that wants products for, and also Eurasia with 25% of our volume. And in terms of the limit of the capacity, I'd say the larger your capacity is in a supply and demand system, the more businesses can profit from it and go international, trade internationally with fewer barriers.
Merci, Monsieur Brice.
Parole, 6 minutes,
We
s'il vous
have
plaît.
Mr. Barceval. You have 6 minutes. So I'll start with Mr. Baudry from First Turn. Welcome to this committee. Very happy to have you here. Mr. Baudry, on February 23rd, we had the opportunity of receiving the Minister of Transport, Stephen McKinnon. And at that point, what I had said is that for the expansion project in Contrecoeur, there were consultations that took place in the immediate environment in Verchères and Contrecoeur. And also in Boucherville and Varennes, there were no specific consultations held. And whether you want it or not, the containers that will be going through Contrecoeur will have to be transported either on the autoroute or on the railway, because it's equivalent to 60% of the Montreal capacity, 1.15 million containers that will be transported by the railway, for example. So it will be a very important effect on the citizens in Boucherville and Varennes. And when I communicated that to the minister, I affirmed that my request for consultations in Boucherville and Varennes, with Transport Canada being present, the Montreal port being present, and another group. So I would like to know, would the port be willing to take part in such consultations? Thank you for the question. So you have to know that in 2017, in the impact study, the increase of trucking and railway traffic was considered, and during consultations that were held not by the Port Authority but by the agency, there are several citizens in Boucherville and also from other municipalities in Montérégie and also from elsewhere in Quebec who sent their comments. They sent briefs from Verchères, from Varennes, from Contrecoeur, but also from Boucherville. But as a designated project, we first concentrated on the project impacts. Now we're no longer at the stage of consultations, but the Montreal Port Authority organizes events. We organize information meetings, mechanisms for being good neighbors. We'll always be happy to answer the question if we receive them, and to go into a consultation mechanism where we're not owners of the rail infrastructures that belongs to CN. But these questions and comments were sent to the agencies, and we will answer. I am noting the recommendation to do more for these citizens in those municipalities, and we'll do that. We'll continue to answer the question. So what I understand from that is that you'll respond if you receive an invitation from the Minister's Office, from Transport Canada, from CN, or from the city of Boucherville. But you're saying that it's the CN that is responsible, but there are still issues of connections. So what's going through through there will come from the port, so the port would be in a better position to answer. So I think it's important you be there. Currently, there's preparatory work that's happening. So I've heard that there are some of those properties that have been contaminated. I was told that there might be a contamination of drinking water with snow melting and others. And there are 2 lots that are contaminated. P252 contains cadmium, copper, nickel, lead, oil products and zinc, and another 120 Marie Victorin as aluminum, ammoniac, nitrates, iron, vanadium, zinc, chromium, manganese, and nickel. And under the Environment Act, before the emitting permits, contaminated properties such as this have to have a plan for cleaning up approved by the department and by parks. So that's in Quebec. And the port did not make the request for permits from the city or submitted a rehabilitation plan from Quebec. But what are the intentions of the port for in terms of contaminated areas? So you have to know that for the site, the greatest area was consecrated to agricultural activities, growing corn and soya. The western part that you're mentioning with those two properties already was the site of industrial activities. So there was a characterization of the sites that was communicated to the federal authorities. And given that we're already doing work, the necessary measures, so setting up barriers so that there's no contamination of the stream that's nearby, so these measures have already been put in place. We have to know that on this site, even when there is work, vehicles take advantage or have a mechanical cleaning. So the site of contamination, the contamination does not leave the site, and when it needs to leave, we apply the Quebec regulations. We use the Trace Quebec program. So the entire site, I really want to reassure committee members that the whole site is managed in an exemplary way with measures that make us accountable, and we are accountable to authorities, including the federals. And we don't ask for permits from the Quebec government or the municipality, but the Quebec government did participate in the consultation process, which allowed us to get a declaration of a favorable decision. And our choice of not requesting permits, it's like we respected the federal orientation. Master, Mr. Baudry and Mr. Percival.
5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses that are here with your expertise. So this committee, back in March of 2023, did a national study on large port infrastructure. In fact, the Port of Montreal was our first stop, so thank you for hosting us. And from that, we made 12 recommendations in terms of competitiveness, streamlining approvals processes, strengthening financial flexibility. The Government of Canada at the time responded saying that this was a priority, but yet we're 3 years on and we're still talking about some of the same issues. And so I guess my question comes in two parts. One is, have you seen in the last 3 years any tangible removal of bottlenecks or reforms by the federal government to make, to get out of the way and let you expand the port and do your job? And two, can you amplify why it's so important that we can't talk for 3 more years? We actually need to have action and get things done because we're losing economic opportunities around the world.
De façon très
in a pragmatic way, there's no no doubt that this designation as one of the major projects allows us to go faster. We can take advantage of a special expertise. There's no acceleration measure, but being in the fast lane when you're working with various departments helps us. It also helps the private sector. A vote of confidence for a project enables the mobilization of private capital. So there are administrative requirements. The Port of Montreal wants to collaborate to a greater degree with other ports in Canada. But the executive aspect of such a message is really important for us. There's also an international appetite for the diversification of exchanges, not only in Canada. We had many German businesses that came to Canada in the previous 5 years because we want diversification to be less dependent on our neighbor to the south. So sending the signals, but also having decisions. We talked about the program for the National Fund of Diversification corridors. Getting quick decisions will allow us to put into place projects and mechanisms which will allow us to create beneficial effects. And that goes beyond the economy. When we work quickly, we can put in compensation measures more quickly for the environment, for example.
But the Port of Montreal may want to weigh in as well. Because one of the things that we heard consistently a few years ago when we did that study, and ever since, has been the need for financial flexibility. That the limitations on port authorities in terms of borrowing and their ability to access capital to make these expansions happen was a limitation. And as a smaller port authority, the Port of Saguenay may be constrained by the limitations of that financial flexibility. There was Bill C-33, which didn't go far enough, was underwhelming. It died on the order paper when Prime Minister Carney called the election. So even those insufficient reforms to financial flexibility and giving more financial tools were cast at the wayside. So maybe you can talk a bit more about how it's important for you to have that flexibility.
C'est très important pour nous d'avoir accès.
It's very important for us to have access to capital so we can implement the projects we want. We are a small organization, maybe compared to the Port of Montreal, but when we build a dock, it's the same price as is the case for similar dock sizes in Montreal. So we need funding instruments that are better tailored to smaller ports like ours who face important challenges. It should be reflected in infrastructure programs. The National Corridors Diversification Fund has done a great job, so we should be able to access some funds. So we need increased flexibility, funding levers that are also different. For example, there was a conveyor project for 110 million. For that, we received help from Quebec and from the government, federal government, but we also needed a loan. Our credit limit did not allow us access the financing through the traditional means. So it's the government of Quebec that lent us the money. So it's paradoxical given that we are a Canadian Ports Authority. So we are managing assets that belong to the Canadian government, but the Canadian government didn't help us. So it's the government of Quebec that did. So we hope now that the Canada Infrastructure Bank will be able to intervene and give us such loans. Thank you very much, Mr. Labeche.
Nous avons Madame O'Rourke.
Madame O'Rourke, you have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Welcome to our witnesses this morning. Very interesting. This is something we witnessed during COVID and after COVID. There was a ship that was stuck in the Suez Canal. There were lots of problems in the global supply chains. How can the Canadian ports, if reinforced, can they help us face any future disruptions? And Mr. Baudry, you talked about the influence of climate change. How could the ports adapt to face any future climate change? And the same question also goes to Mr. Laberge. Let Mr. Laberge answer first, maybe. No problem. In our case, to answer the first part of the question, certainly the role we can play is to have infrastructure that is available when we need it. Sometimes it takes a lot of time to develop port infrastructure. It's expensive. So when problems arise, like what we saw last week, it's not when the problem arises that we should build. We should prepare the infrastructure in advance so that we can respond to events. So we should be ready to do all that in our ports authorities so that we are ready. So that's what we need to do in terms of building our capacity right here in Canada. When we talk about climate resilience, it depends on infrastructure. We are all not in the same position. We need to make sure that irrespective of events that arise, we should have infrastructure available, be it in terms of docks, dredging systems, extreme weather conditions. We should be able to deal with all those events. So we need to be able to adapt to all those circumstances. Ports infrastructures we have were built many years ago. So many of them need to be renovated. So we need significant investments to do that. As my colleague Mr. Laberge just said, we have old infrastructure. They have to be maintained, develop new ones, and also engage in technological change. So our ports authorities need various sources of infrastructure. New York, for example, manages a lot of money per day for. So we are not in the same dynamic when it comes to income. If we want to improve our resilience, we need to repatriate the supply chains to Canada. Take, for example, the case of fruits and vegetables going through Philadelphia. They should be going through Toronto, Montreal, or other regions in Canada because we have decisions that will be taken by other people that will increase cost. Right now, why are they not being repatriated? We prefer to pay more to have more resilience or more performance. Let me insist. Take, for example, the state of Georgia. It invests $4.3 million in its infrastructure in the ports, and they have succeeded in developing a significant manufacturing industry. Why? Because the system is less risky. Now, Mr. Baudry, you talked about commodities that go through the United States. In an article, a former neighbor of mine, a professor at Dalhousie University, explained that the new diversification fund was really an investment intended to improve our supply chains, which could help reduce the cost of food stuff. Do you share that opinion? And what other investments in infrastructure would be necessary to reduce the cost of food and other things? Because you also stated that when a food item faces more competition, it's a user that suffers. Thank you for your question. In the food industry, it is certain that to bring back those supply chains, we need capacities in the ports, of course, but we should also be able to build real ecosystems in the food chain. And this starts with technologies, electronic appliances that could be, we need, for example, refrigerators that are connected to electricity. So people who want to be more competitive have decided to come back to the Port of Montreal because they have electric systems. Without those appliances, those products will not come here. But some American states have come up with incentives as well. Thank you, Mr. Baudry. Thank you, Madame Owok. Mr. Barcelot-Duval, 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair. I'll continue with Mr. Baudry. You must have seen a study from Eric Pinault concerning the economic viability of the expansion project. His justification, as mentioned in the study, is that the projections of the Port of Montreal in the past regarding future growth had not materialized, and that right now there is no bottlenecks existing at the ports. So in a context where there are no bottlenecks right now at the Port of Montreal, is it really urgent for those projects to be constructed? Maybe there are other studies. Maybe there are other studies you want to mention. Well, we welcome all university studies. We have Waterloo professors and students who also produced a study. Unfortunately, there were many factual errors regarding the size, the depth of the river, and so on. But we do not consider they do not consider the economic needs of the businesses. Their predictions are based on the Bank of Canada data, Export Canada data. So the 2017 projections did not come into fruition. This is a different world. Unfortunately, recently there were labor disputes, and that time was used to make progress with engineering works associated with the project. So to meet the needs of Canadian businesses, we receive messages from... I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you. I don't have enough time. I would like to ask another question that goes to the port of Saguenay. My question to Mr. Laberge is that your project, as you mentioned a while ago, focuses on mining exploration because of your proximity to the mines. How do you see or to what extent could we make sure that we don't only engage in exploration, but also in processing? So how do you conceive all this, especially with the beluga? This is exactly the opportunities we're developing at the Port of Saguenay, with opportunities not only for exporting mining products, but also the possibility for transformation or processing, because we have the area and facilities for those projects. We need natural gas, we need expertise and labor. And these are things we have right here in Saguenay. What we want are projects with mining concentration in the north to reduce volumes. So when we are trying to process certain products right here to create jobs. Thank you very much, Mr. Laberge. Thank you, Mr. Barcelou-Loubal.
Yes, sir.
Je veux remercier Monsieur le Président et aussi.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses. My questions goes to Mr. Laberge. Welcome. You said that your port has enormous opportunities. It's the same thing I discussed with the MP from Chicoutimi-Lefroid. And this is a fantastic opportunity for Canada, and particularly for Quebec and the Saguenay. Can you explain to us exactly what opportunities exist? Thank you very much for the question. As I said, we are developing infrastructure right here to be able to do all that. But what is also important to know is that it's huge. We want to develop projects that will last for years. We are well connected to the rail system towards the north of Quebec in Chikabamumu, but we can also improve the rail connections towards a mining sector that is very prolific in the north of Quebec, and we can go right to the north of Ontario by rail from west to east, and this will help facilitate the transportation of minerals from the north of Ontario, going through Quebec and going right to the port of Saguenay to be able to ship commodities if we want further processing. This is something unique we have to offer right now, and this is a great opportunity for Canada based on existing infrastructure and current planning. So we hope that the government, including the government of Canada, will work with the regions of the north to improve this infrastructure so that these mining projects are realized and ensure the diversification of our markets. Your port is therefore a strategic location, particularly when we consider the geopolitical situation. My leader was in Germany to discuss and promote our natural resources like liquefied natural gas and so on. And also our critical and strategic mineral reserves. It would appear to me that your port may play an important role in all this. Now, the federal government has stopped your efforts. The Digenel project was stopped a few years ago. Do you agree with the strategic nature of your port? Yes, we totally agree. And as I said a while ago, it is rather exceptional to have a port site where it's also possible to develop major industrial activities. There was an LNG project that was proposed and turned down by the federal government in 2022. But right now, we are looking at new opportunities. There are opportunities in critical and strategic minerals. There's also a potential for other types of projects, industrial projects like energy and so on. And this is something that has a lot of value in the long term. So it's worth investing in such infrastructure because it's something that the world is going to need for a long time, particularly looking at the current Canadian strategy. We need to resolve the situation of overregulation of ports and financing. As you said to the committee, maybe you need to reinforce your message to the Minister of Transport and the Minister of Infrastructure, and also to it's something that the MP of Chicoutimi Lafort told me as well. As I said a while ago, investments have been made in port infrastructure, and there was a program that came up, and we hope we can profit from that. But we need to develop our industrial infrastructure as well, and we need to go further than that. So we need, for example, other basic infrastructure that will enable us to have railways and so on, things that will help us develop our industrial capacity. We, of course, need additional financial levers and programs that go further to help us have access to capital to take the risks that we are not able to take right now. That is very important. We would like to see the participation of the Canada Infrastructure Bank. Thank you very much, Mr. Labesh.
This panel, we have Mr. Kellaway. Mr. Kellaway, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and hello, everyone. So I think what we've established here today is that the government is working to diversify trade, ensuring exporters can access markets around the world. We know that modern, efficient ports are critical to making that possible. All the witnesses have talked about that. So I'm wondering from your perspective, and can you tell us how important federal investments in port infrastructure, including the corridor fund, the trade corridor programs are, to ensuring Canadian exports can reach international markets that makes Canada more globally competitive. And I'm thinking you can look at this from two perspectives or both perspectives. You can look at the what was the $4.1 billion that was invested in the diversification corridors fund, and I believe that the NCTF $847 million of that 4.1 was spent in Quebec. So you can talk about the monies that were allocated, or the new monies, the $6 billion in the new diversification corridors fund. how is this going to make us more competitive? I wonder if you can, boil it down to maybe 3 or 4 points, and we could start with Monsieur Labage to kick us off.
Pour nous, effectivement.
For us, the NCCF program was very important because it allowed us, among other things, to finance a bulk handling project. Another one was recently announced, was crucial for infrastructure like ours to help us increase our ports capacity quickly so we could respond to demand quickly and be able to face future events as well. So that is what we're preparing for. We do hope that this fund will be flexible enough to help us develop some infrastructure, some transport infrastructure related to industrial development so that we can take advantage of the upcoming opportunities.
Thank you for that. And I think you said a key word there, flexibility, in terms of the current allotment of dollars that were approved through the budget. So I'm wondering if we can go to our next witness, Monsieur Baudry, if you would like to comment on investments that are in the budget, how they will help, but you can also speak to the past investments that have been made through other funds that Quebec has accessed.
La question, il n'y a aucun doute que l'investissement public.
There's no doubt that public investment in port projects has a very strong lever effect. The ports don't receive money for operating costs. Any project that we carry out is a project that belongs to the state, that's public, but that's funded by the private sector. And when you have a public contribution, which de-risks investments, that's the case in Contrecoeur, but also in other projects we carried out on the island of Montreal, we make sure that the public asset increases in value. And I want to come back to this lever effect. In Montreal and in Contrecoeur, we will be supporting close to 1 million jobs a year. 10% of Quebec GDP goes through the Montreal port at some point or another. So that lever effect is important, and it goes even to Canadian homes. It's products that we use every day. When there are funds that help us, it's positive, but it's important to keep a balance between the private sector and the public sector because the private sector has a role to play. And we hope that balance be even stronger in the new version, as my colleague said, which greater flexibility and greater vision so that there can be more resilience in the ports system.
The jobs that can be created, the export of product and bringing product in is important, not just to those financial stakeholders, but how we cut down on costs on everyday products, but the jobs it creates in Quebec, it is substantial. It is a huge engine. I think I have about 30 seconds left. So what I want to do, and maybe we'll stick with you, Mr. Baudry, in terms of this particular question, and then we'll go to Mr. Labage. If there were 1 or 2 bottlenecks that you would recommend that the Government of Canada, in collaboration with you, focus on, what would they be?
Un goulot d'étranglement à l'heure actuelle est un enjeu de données.
One current bottleneck is the question of data. We need to have better visibility in terms of data to take better decisions. Physical infrastructures are crucial, but the digital infrastructures that we need to operate ports are important. So there are several projects that are on the table currently, and they're essential that we can use all the investments, good use of all investments in public infrastructure. I would say, mentioned that it was access to capital for where the port authorities can have access to loans devoted to the type of organization that we are, to work with us for major projects and also for our clients. This whole aspect of permitting, that's a very long process in Quebec and in Canada. We need to fund projects, and that becomes very complicated. So if we can move more quickly, if it can be more flexible when we in terms of funding mechanisms, we'll be much more effective partners. Thank you very much, Mr. Laberge. Thank you, Mr. Baudry, for having taken the time to be with us.
The next round of witnesses. The meeting is suspended to the call of the chair. Call this meeting back to order. Collègues, j'aimerais maintenant souhaiter la bienvenue à nos témoins.
I would now like to welcome our witnesses, starting with the Trois-Rivières Port Authority, Annick Métivier, President and Chief Executive Officer by video conference, Vigie Soutrain Port de Contrecoeur, Hélène Reeves, spokesperson.
Chief Executive Officer. Great to have you all here. We're going to start with our opening remarks, and for that, Mr. Salmons, I'll turn the floor over to you. You have 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and all honorable members of the committee. First of all, allow me to recognize and thank each of you for your particular attention and focus on the support, diversification, and modernization of Canada's port system. As you may be aware from my colleagues who have made many presentations now and the Association of Canadian Port Authorities, we've been diligently advocating for reform to the Canada Marine Act and more recently regulatory reforms without any necessary changes to the Act. These would provide Canada's national port system with the flexibility, the tools, and the necessarily prosper and meet our full intent of the Act. That being contributing to competitiveness, growth, and prosperity of the Canadian economy. I always begin by reminding the audience that Canada has many coasts, the east, the west, the north, but it also has an underutilized southern corridor, Canada's fourth coast, the St. Lawrence Seaway system, or more descriptively, the St. Lawrence Great Lakes Seaway. Surrounded by 2 provinces and 8 states, collectively, we are the world's 3rd largest economy. And yet, we allow this corridor to languish at less than 50% capacity. While it is now obvious to everyone that we must reduce our reliance on U.S. trade and diversify to include non-U.S. trade, I would submit that this central corridor trade continues to be essential to the economies of our country. The shipments of grain, aggregates, salt, fuels, iron ore, steel, aluminum, and so many more products are as essential to our mutual Great Lakes economies as containers are to the east and west coasts. And collaboration, not competition, is how it all works. Windsor takes grain from Thunder Bay and ships protein meal to Quebec. Quebec ships steel and aluminum to Windsor. Windsor sends asphalt to Hopa. In short, we are a system mutually dependent on the strength of each port, with each port contributing their strengths and serving their local economy. Strong economies across the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway only means a strong Canada. And despite the current geopolitical climate, the U.S. ports are also an essential part of that system. I don't compete with Detroit, Monroe, Cleveland. However, their governments compete with me by providing a steady stream of funding and financial supports to encourage renewal and product diversification in their markets. People are always surprised to learn that Canada's ports do not receive annual funding from the federal government. We are designed and tasked to be self-sufficient with all the tools provided in the Act. However, our system is aging, our revenue model has peaked, the regulatory restrictions are limiting our growth options, and the Americans are moving forward with, or I fear, without us. Cleveland, Monroe, Detroit, Illinois, Duluth are now all providing short sea shipping of containers to world markets for their industry and their local economies. While Windsor is building, Hamilton and Quebec City are ready, we have been hamstrung by regulatory barriers, the worst of which have been the inability of CBSA to provide the necessary support. That, in the face of a recently commissioned study by the Great Lakes ports that overwhelmingly verified that in each and every port, the short sea shipping of containers on the Great Lakes is faster and cheaper for industry. In fact, at Port Windsor, it would reduce shipping time by 8 days and shave $3,000 per container for industry. And all CBSA costs would be recovered in just under 90 days each year. The short sea shipping of containers provides supply chain capacity, security, and most importantly, opportunity. The last big idea on the Great Lakes was in 1959, when we opened the St. Lawrence Seaway. Perhaps after nearly 70 years, it's time to be bold once again. Thank you very much for the honor and privilege to provide my comments and attend your committee today. And I'll use my last few seconds to acknowledge and say hello to my MP in Port Windsor, Arbiel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salmons. Prochainement, nous avons Madame Hélène Reeves. À vous la parole.
We have
minutes.
Ms. Alana Reeves. You have 5 minutes. Hello, Chair. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the committee. Vigie Citoyenne, the Canadian Port of Contrecoeur, is a citizens' organization concerned about the environmental, social, and economic impacts of the Port of Contrecoeur. Let's start with the economic aspect. On CBC News, The National, Professor Jean-Paul Rodrigue, a maritime traffic specialist at Texas A&M University, recently said that the Contrecoeur Port project should have been built 20 years ago and that it is no longer relevant. He explains that this is because the new containers ships are getting bigger and bigger and cannot sail to Contrecoeur or Montreal due to the shallow draft of about 11 meters. Mr. Rodrigue believes that this $2.3 billion expansion would not develop new markets, but would cannibalize the existing market in Montreal. In his view, the future lies in deepwater ports from Quebec City towards the Atlantic. A recent university study by Éric Pinault of the UQAM Institute of Environmental Sciences concludes that the Port of Contrecoeur is likely to be underutilized, unprofitable, and a financial burden for Canadian taxpayers. They explain that the Port of Montreal, far from being saturated, is already missing its traffic targets and is not taking into account climate change, which is lowering the river level and threatening the viability of a terminal that is already unable to accommodate the majority of the world's fleet. The Port of Montreal did handle 1.5 million containers in 2025, which is the same volume as in 2014. In terms of the environment, the destruction of an exceptional ecosystem on the banks of the St. Lawrence River, adjacent to the Contrecoeur Islands Federal Wildlife Reserve, would be an inestimable loss. It would never occur to members of Parliament that in Stanley Park, a port would cut down 13,000 trees and concrete over hundreds of acres. Preserving the century-old Contrecoeur forest is also essential as it serves as a natural lungs next to an already heavily industrialized area. Air quality is at stake as the port would add GHGs and polluting emissions from its machinery, ships at berth burning fuel oil 24 hours a day, and an estimated 1,200 trucks a day. We fear for the health of citizens, as Public Health Report has already mentioned a higher rate of lung disease and cancer in the region. The health of the river is also threatened, as the banks are suffering from massive erosion, which was attributed mainly to the swell caused by commercial ships, which would be greatly increased by the project. We're concerned about water quality, as the port's work will be carried out on land identified in the Contrecoeur municipal bylaws as being contaminated by the presence of many metals and petroleum products. But the Port of Montreal will not comply with the required construction permits, as the mayor stated recently that she will have to comply with the port's demands to negotiate financial compensation behind closed doors. We're asking the committee's help to ensure that the port complies with city regulations, as the contaminants that are present could, during construction, contaminate the river and Contrecoeur drinking water, which is 5 kilometers downstream. This failure to comply with city regulations is also cause for concern, as the port has entrusted DP World, a company from United Arab Emirates, with the land works and the operation of the Port of Contrecoeur for 40 years. Recently, the Caisse de dépôt et de placement du Québec suspended its investments with DP World because of its CEO's ties to Jeffrey Epstein. In the U.S., Congress had opposed DP World's investments in several ports for reasons of national security. We're calling for a review by the Office of National Security and the Intelligence Activities Oversight on the consequences of DP World's control of the Contrecoeur for 40 years. For all these reasons, we're calling for a moratorium on the Port of Contrecoeur project so that independent experts can reassess its relevance. Given its cost of $2.3 billion, including $580 million in subsidies, and the fact that it doesn't seem to be an effective solution for diversifying our markets and depend less on the U.S. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be glad to answer any of your questions. Thank you to you, Ms. Reeves. Now we have Mr. Métivier. You have the floor for 5 minutes. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, thank you for welcoming me today. The Port of Trois-Rivières handles more than 4 million tons of cargo annually and sees the passage of 70,000 trucks, 11,000 rail cars, and nearly 250 ships. It serves businesses located throughout Quebec, Ontario, and as far west as Western Canada, which operate in key economic sectors such as manufacturing, agri-food, mining, and energy. The Port of Trois-Rivières is currently undertaking the largest investment project in its history between 2024 and 2027. More than $300 million will have been invested by the Port Authority, its partners, and the governments of Quebec and Canada to rebuild or build 2 wharves and 3 terminals. This project marks the culmination of a major upgrade effort that began in 2008 that's modernized a large part of the port's freight transport infrastructure. But as soon as they will have been completed, these facilities will be used to their full capacity. To support businesses in accessing overseas markets, the Port of Trois-Rivières will have to be able to deploy additional capacity. Along the St. Lawrence corridor, several elements of infrastructure are reaching the end of their useful life. Their reconstruction is no longer a matter of maintenance, but a question of economic continuity and of logistical sovereignty. However, rebuilding identically to what was designed for the needs of 100 years ago would be an error. Modernization must accompany reconstruction. Supply chains have changed dramatically over time. Larger ships, specialized terminals, and increased integration with rail and road networks. At the same time, ports must cope with growing environmental requirements that are set to intensify over time. But our port system now faces a challenge of unprecedented magnitude, supporting Canadian companies and diversifying their export markets in a context of global upheaval. More than ever, our companies must be able to rely on a strong, agile, and resilient port network. This resilience depends on a complementary port network where each port on the St. Lawrence plays a specific role. In this network, the Port of Trois-Rivières occupies a strategic position. It's located in the heart of the St. Lawrence corridor and helps to regulate supply chains and provide key industries such as aluminum smelters and critical minerals with access to global markets. Ports must be both gateways to the global markets and partners to the local community. They must therefore combine global issues with local needs. It's in this context that the project to develop the part of the Port of Trois-Rivières facility is located near the city centre and in continuity with the urban fabric is taking place. To achieve these ambitions, we're working along with Transport Canada to obtain necessary powers. Your committee's work has highlighted the limitations of the current framework. Port authorities are being asked to manage multi-generational public assets, to make massive investments, and to be financially self-sufficient, while also playing an increased role in the energy transition and integration into the living environment. In this context, 3 concrete courses of actions emerge clearly. First of all, explicitly recognizing that rebuilding and modernizing existing infrastructure are strategic investments that are essential to market diversification and to economic resilience. Secondly, accelerating and making federal levers more predictable, especially for projects that are ready to start and are supported by communities. Thirdly, adapting the regulatory framework to enable ports to fully fulfill their dual role, acting as gateways to global markets while also serving as integrated partners in their communities. Finally, one factor keeps coming up: time. The projects are ready, needs are documented, partners are mobilized. What's needed now is a rapid, consistent, and predictable activation of federal levers. In this regard, we welcome the recent launch of the Trade Diversification Corridor Fund and the Arctic Infrastructure Fund. In conclusion, in an unstable global context, in order to truly diversify our markets, reduce our vulnerabilities, and strengthen our economic sovereignty, Canada must consolidate the entirety of its port network. It must also provide ports with the tools they need to take action today and for decades to come. Thank you for the time and your attention. Thank you very much, Mr. Métivier. We'll start with Mr. Muse. You have the floor. You have 6 minutes.
All the witnesses for being here and taking time to share your thoughts with us. I had the opportunity on January 16th to be in Windsor with my friend and colleague, Mr. Gill and Ms. Borelli, and we discussed with a number of businesses various issues in Windsor, and I know I had a session with the Windsor Essex Chamber of Commerce at the end of the day. Unfortunately, you were not available, and there was someone who asked a couple of questions on your behalf, but frankly, I think it's better if we just ask those questions directly here and have that discussion. It's going to be more fulsome. So I'm really glad that you talked about Canada's Fourth Coast. Because with HOPA, Hamilton Oshawa Port, being in my backyard, they've done some great work on that. And we know the huge opportunity that's frankly being missed here with the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway, particularly when it comes to short sea shipping, as you've talked about. And you mentioned, Cleveland, Duluth, and Detroit and others in the U.S. side are galloping ahead. What do we have to do to catch up and ensure that we're going to leap ahead on short sea shipping?
The answer is not a lack of willingness and lack of readiness by the ports. We have been advocating for this for years. And in fact, the ports I mentioned, both Hamilton, HOPA, and Quebec City, have ready-made and ready-to-go facilities. With the last trade corridor funding program in the early 20s, Port Windsor was successful, and we are currently building a terminal that will be short sea container shipping ready and enabled. The problem we face is really one of securing proper support from CBSA. We have been in regular communications with them. They have regularly responded with a lack of resources, unable to support this. We have been very gratified in the last budget to see some direction to CBSA and Transport Canada to provide support, starting with Hamilton and Quebec City, but it's not enough, quite frankly. Yes, Hamilton and Quebec City got to get going. But the system on the Great Lakes will only work when all ports are participating. Unlike the East and West Coast, where you'll bring in a ship of 8, 10, 12,000 containers, we're looking at 8, 1,000, 1,200 containers. And it's a milk run. You pick up a few hundred, drop off a few hundred, and you go right through the Great Lakes and pick them up. It will be efficient and successful when we're all in it, including our American partners. But having said that, we can't wait for the next 2 years for Hamilton and Quebec City to get on board, and then we'll look at Windsor, then we'll look at Thunder Bay, then we will look at Picton, then we will, we can't wait for a decade. By the end of this decade, we will have 6 major American ports up and running.
Thank you for amplifying that on the importance of the CBSA facility for the system at Windsor. And the fact that we can't wait, and so that I think dovetails to my next question, because you talked at the outset about regulatory reforms and the advocacy that you've been doing. Of course, that the Association of Port Authorities has been doing, and we've heard from them as well, and being hamstrung by regulatory burdens. And this committee toured ports and talked about port infrastructure 3 years ago. And then there was Bill C-33, which really didn't address a lot of the issues that we heard, and that died on the order paper. But what needs to be done? Because we can't wait another 3 years of talk and no action. What can be done now to ensure that we're not waiting and falling further behind from those U.S. ports?
We have met with with senior policy officials of Transport Canada to lay out a go-forward strategy in the absence of Bill 33. We had advocated right from the beginning during the first discussions on modernization of the Marine Act that most of what ports need can be done without modernization. It's in the regulatory features. It's the lending. You've heard a lot about this, I know, about the lending environment, about flexibility and allowing us to move forward in lines of business that are marine and logistics related and consistent, but restricted under the current act. Allowing collaboration between ports. We have been engaged with our colleagues in Hamilton, Thunder Bay, and other ports to create consortiums, and that's restricted.
1 minute? Okay. So that's helpful because we've heard about the financial flexibility, and that was one of the levers that was addressed in C-33, although in our view it was insufficient. So I'm curious to have your view on that, because that's limiting what you can do to expand and seize all of those opportunities.
Yes. So when it comes to borrowing, our argument has always been, ultimately we have to go to the markets, banks most likely, and there is no criteria that officials in transport or finance can put before us that are going to be tougher than the banks. And there's always been an argument that, well, ultimately it comes back to the government of Canada. We own the assets, we own the liability. We have a feature in the Act that says we are unable to pledge the Crown as a guarantee. We've suggested that the solution is just as simple. We cannot pledge the Crown to guarantee the liability.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salmons, and thank you very much, Mr. Muse. Next, we'll go to Mr. Greaves. Mr. Greaves, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning to all of our witnesses, or at least good morning from British Columbia. Thank you for being here. I'd like to maybe build on my colleague's question just now about some of the regulatory or red tape obstacles to your port's efficiency and to your port's expansion. So if I might ask both of the representatives of our ports here today to say, if there was a single non-financial action that the federal government could take that would help streamline your operations or reduce your regulatory burden, can you tell us what your top priority for that action would be? Peut-être Monsieur Métivier, after that, Mr. Salmons would be great.
Oui, bonjour, merci de la question.
Good morning. Thank you for the question. Conversely, I would like you to clarify, are you talking about non-financial action?
That's correct. So outside of new investments, what single action would have the biggest impact that the federal government could take for you?
Donc, dans le contexte de tout nouveau projet.
In the context of new projects, and it's something we referred to a while ago, is speedy responses and efficiency, be it in assistance we receive to promote projects. We need that some processes be accelerated without downplaying the quality of environmental work that has to be done. So I think that's what needs to be improved upon.
Merci. Mr. Salmons, the same question.
I would absolutely agree with my colleague. We, as part of the National Trade Corridor Funding Project, where we're building a new port capable and ready for short sea containers, we have been 3 years through regulatory approval processes with Parks Canada, fisheries, navigation, environmental assessment, impact assessment. 3 years, and we haven't even got to the shovel in the ground. We may not get one in the ground in 2027 because we're simply running out of building time during the season. So it'll be 4 years from approval to construction. We need to collapse that time. And it's not just as my colleague said, the legitimate requirements to prove we are not harming the environment and what benefits we're contributing. It's also it's the duplication of requirements. It continues to confound me that each department and regulatory process that we went through, each one wants unique and separate Indigenous consultations. 2 of them each wanted distinct and separate impacts on fish species and water flow. We had one requirement to prove that infilling an inlet of about 60 feet across and maybe 150 meters long would not affect the Great Lake levels by emptying it out. These are just ludicrous, and so my suggestion to the committee would be, we need to give departmental officials an opportunity to use common sense, to have thresholds where they can make calls in the field level without having to tick every box on the sheet.
Okay, thank you very much for those responses. In a maybe slightly related vein, one of the things that we've heard at this committee, both today and from previous witnesses, is the role that other supporting infrastructure gaps play in preventing some of the efficiencies and growth in these ports. So maybe beginning with Mr. Salmons, and then we'll go to Mr. Métivier afterwards. If you could point to either a single or a small number of off-site infrastructure bottlenecks that limit the growth of your port facility, whether that was rail, whether that was road, or something else. Is there anything else that you would want to flag for the committee in terms of other investments, in addition to the port itself, that would be necessary for your future growth plans?
I concluded my opening comments with the opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway in 1959. The Seaway has served this region so well, and this country so well, but it is unfortunately too limited seasonally. And to the credit of the St. Lawrence Seaway Corporation, they are in fact looking for means to extend that season. There has to be a commitment and an objective and a goal to achieve year-round shipping. I'm not saying every day. They do have to close for maintenance. There are going to be days when you can't fight Mother Nature and there's just too much ice. But we in the marine industry, both shippers, operators, ports, believe, and in our discussions with the leadership of the Seaway Corporation, believe there can be measures with the right investments and the right creativity and the right thinking to open up the Seaway to a 365-day operation.
Great, thank you very much for that. Monsieur Métivier, à vous.
Oui, merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. For us, every time we improve a port or make it more efficient through infrastructure or through equipment, it has an impact on the railways, for example. We could receive more trucks, more ships, and so on. Of course, the impact off-site is to be considered. So we should look at the general picture. Improving ports is one thing, but we need to make it possible to ensure that there's a flow off-site that would not hamper development. So we need to make sure that the railways and roads may follow the developments as we improve the ports.
Nous avons Monsieur Barcelo-Duval.
Mr. Barcelo-Duval, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Let me start with Madam Raves. In your opening remarks a while ago, you mentioned contaminated sites at Contrecoeur. And in the questions I had asked before, there seems to be some commitment when it comes to treating contaminants. Have you been reassured when it comes to commitments that have been made so far about that? It's not reassuring because there are regulations in Contrecoeur which are public and that must be respected. I do not see how a federal agency will say it will not respect the city's regulations. That's a bad precedent. Regulations are public, and there are public documents, and the citizens have access to all these documents. That is very important. I have a degree in law from the University of Montreal, so I can tell you that the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court have ruled on environmental issues and have said there had to be cooperative federalism. So each level of government had to be respected because the ultimate objective is to preserve the environment and to preserve the health of citizens. So we cannot put that at risk. Let me also add that construction will be done by DP World United Arab Emirates. So from the time when construction is done by DP World UAE and there's no process for observing the laws and regulations of Quebec at all levels, municipalities, provincial level, and federal level, we will lose total control. What shall we do then? It's extremely important as well because everything is being done at the shores of the St. Lawrence. So if the St. Lawrence River is contaminated, it's going to be a disaster. And we have projects that are just 5 kilometers upstream. So this is very disturbing for the people. Thank you very much. Let me take advantage of this to table a motion, which I would like to read out right now, that the Port of Montreal make available to the public and send a copy to the committee about its rehabilitation plan for contaminated land in Contrecoeur, and that the committee invite the port, call on the port to respect municipal regulations and Quebec's environmental laws. Do we need to suspend, or are people ready to respond to my spoken motion?
On va suspendre pendant 2 minutes.
We will suspend for 2 minutes so I can speak with the clerk.
Chair. Call this meeting back to order. There's been an agreement to discuss the motion put forward by Mr. Xavier Barcelou-Duval at the beginning of the next meeting. For now, we'll turn the floor over to Mr. Gill for 5 minutes of questioning, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and great to see you here, Mr. Salmons. Through you, Chair, I've known this gentleman for over 10 years, and he has been a loyal servant of the entire region of Windsor, and especially the port. And a shout out to the Harbour Master as well, Peter Barry, who has just been nominated as the honorary captain of the Canadian Navy. Is that correct, Mr. Simons?
Correct.
All right. And again, a dedicated professional and a public servant as well. Not sure if you can answer my question or not, Mr. Simons, but when is the bridge going to open? That is the concern we both have, and many people in the Windsor-Essex region have, and in the entire country. As we both know, over 30% of the trade for the country goes through there. $500 million to $1 billion worth of goods every day across the bridge, and people are looking for the second bridge to open. Do you know, or have you been involved in any talks with Bridging North America, or have you been kept in the loop by the Ministry of Infrastructure, or the Minister of Infrastructure for that matter, because the bridge is going over your jurisdiction? Have they kept you in the loop to say when the bridge is going to open, or what the toll rates are going to be, or when they're going to be published?
Well, thank you, Mr. Gill. As members may know, Port Windsor is the host of 2 international crossings. In fact, 3. The Detroit-Windsor Bridge Tunnel is also through the port. The Ambassador currently and the bridge, and of course, there's a desperate need for a new crossing. It is slow. Our trade depends on it. When there was a protest a couple of years back, we understood what happens to our economies when that bridge shuts down. We understood that during COVID as well. So, with that problem, we're anxious to see it open. I can give you a guess. I don't know. Sure. I'm hoping early summer.
Early summer?
Early summer. Could be as late as August. What's encouraging is the American customs are now on site on the American side. They're commissioning, they're training. They weren't there at Christmas, which meant there was no opening until they went through their 4 to 6 month opening process. So this is encouraging.
Okay. So the holdup is on the U.S. side then? Is that your understanding?
That would be, until they're ready, they won't be opening.
Why is there a lack of transparency from our side, from our ministry, about these issues? This is the first we've heard that the holdup is on the U.S. side. We have had no communications from our side of the government to say this is what's holding up.
The Port Authority, even though we are the host site, are not at the table with the bridge construction project.
Right.
We were a major supplier. We supplied all the, all the concrete, pre-stressed concrete pieces that went in, all the concrete, the asphalt, a lot of material went through Port Windsor. But we were a supplier. We're not unfortunately, the operator. But we're hoping and waiting for it to open because a lot of product that comes into Port Windsor goes into the States, into the manufacturing system there, that integrated market that I talked about in my opening comments. So we want that bridge open as soon as possible.
Good. So what's the port's long-term strategy to ensure Windsor becomes a major logistics hub as opposed to just a waypoint or a bypass zone for people to go through and go to other places?
Yeah. You know, Port Windsor is the only national port on the American border. A lot of ports will say we're 10 minutes, 30 miles, 40 miles from the international border. We are the American border crossing point. And though, you know, land crossings aren't our forte, the integration with road, rail, and marine creates a unique multimodal hub that can't be duplicated anywhere in the country just because of geography. The truth is we are fully serviced by rail. We are the terminus of Highway 401. We are at the doorstep of all the U.S. highway system. We have a fourth crossing. We have a rail tunnel. The CP rail tunnel goes through Port Windsor. So we couldn't be more integrated. And it presents an opportunity, and a question for us is, you know, will this new Gordie Howe be an opportunity of economic prosperity, or will it be an economic bypass? I can tell you on the American side, they are working through containers, through connections of highways, reconnecting their highway system, new transloading facilities that are going to take advantage of this new crossing. And so that's where Port Windsor is desperately working hard to get into the container world. But also we are looking at building warehousing, taking advantage of the free trade zone designation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Salmons, and thank you, Mr. Gill. And finally, for our line of questioning for today, we have Ms. O'Rourke. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Salmons, I'm the Member of Parliament for Guelph. We've got a lot in common. We're all about ag and auto parts and, you know, a thriving southwestern Ontario, so it's a pleasure to meet you. Some of my colleagues took my questions around how do we reduce the regulatory burden, how do we see better integration for full multimodal. So I'll shift to something a little bit different. You mentioned that with the short sea shipping, Windsor can do $3,000 less per container. You can reduce shipping by 8 days. And, Canadian food economists have said that the trade diversification corridor funds through modernizing ports and railways and airports can ease bottlenecks so goods can move faster and perishable products can arrive faster and cheaper. Just given the agricultural powerhouse and the location of all those greenhouses, tell us how improving the port, improving the intermodal can facilitate the distribution of food in Canada and reduce food prices.
And create world markets.
That too. Good.
You know, here's the reality. By creating these multimodal nodes across the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence through Quebec, we create a system of multimodal transfer points, and we will simply use the most convenient and most expeditious choice of mode. Marine always is the greenest and the cheapest form of transportation. Right now, there are 20,000 containers going in and out of Windsor-Essex County every year. 100,000 come into Ontario every month. And unfortunately, they're all rail and truck. It's bad for the environment. It's costly. It's time inefficient. And so if we can begin to move product, the reality, the movement of greenhouse products is not going by container because we don't have container facilities. It's simply not an option to them. And yet we truck it to a facility somewhere else in Canada or sadly into the United States. I have my colleague who just came back from Aruba and was eating cucumbers from Leamington that were brought on a container, but not through Port Windsor. We can do better.
So speaking of improvements in the Port of Windsor, I just have a list in front of me around some recent funding allocations, but it's my understanding they are to occupants of the port, right? So there's up to $12.5 million for the Essex Terminal Railway Company for a cargo terminal infrastructure expansion. There's $5 million in funding for Port Windsor warehousing capacity project. I think that you referenced that. And there's also up to $26.3 million for a grain terminal expansion. So can you tell me, are those projects underway? How do they integrate with the other improvements that you would see for the Port of Windsor? And what does that mean for jobs and the economy in all of southwestern Ontario?
Every one of those projects you listed were matched by 2, 3, 4 times equity from the port and private sector. That's the key, is leveraging, federal contributions to provide the seed money to move forward. The money, the money that went to ADM, they spent $85 million on top of that. ETR is building the container port. That's another $25 million on top of that. So the warehouse will provide us a capacity to deal with transshipment of goods from the Gordie Howe and through and from to and from the port, along with container capacities that will leverage the entire region, whether it's industry or agriculture or construction, building goods that feed the local economy, that integrate with the Great Lakes economy, the third largest in the world, and export to the world. Right now, we're missing a huge chunk of that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. O'Rourke. On behalf of all members of the committee, I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today and sharing their expertise on this very important study. Speaking of studies, colleagues, we have some housekeeping. As you are all aware, we've distributed the budget for this important study on ports. Have Mr. Albus motioning that we approve the budget? Is that what you're...
Quick question.
Yes, sir.
And again, Mr. Chair, I apologize because I just got a chance to review this. Similar to previously, for example, the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, we asked them to see when we brought them in for an earlier study, had they had other government business that they could have attended to. And given that these are all federal entities that have their own existing budget, perhaps, like, for example, Ms. Reeves here is obviously from a civil society group, so I'm not by no means applying this, but to anyone that has a federal Crown corporation or similar should be asked to see if they've done other meetings, and if they had, then maybe we should be asking them to pay for their own way.
Thank you very much, Mr. Albus. Duly noted. I will confirm with our clerk, who is a regular clerk not here today, but I will confer that this is indeed the standard practice. It continues to be the standard practice of this committee. Do I have any objections to adopting this budget?
Again.
Yes.
So are we going to do the review and then report back?
Is that what you'd like us to do before?
Yes, yeah.
approving the
If
budget?
you wouldn't mind, Mr. Chair, again, if I had thought of this earlier, I would have raised it earlier so that we could have had this in one fell swoop.
I will confer with our clerk, and I'll respond to the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. The meeting is adjourned.